So all the tingle.
Yeah, this is so difficult to focus on because you read the history of Fleetwood Mac and there's just so many people involved. It's like trying to learn the history of Coronation Street.
It's true. They're like Pete Frame's absolute dream band. He could have had his whole career just doing Fleetwood Mac.
You would have needed a whole wall of a gallery, though, just to do Fleetwood Mac family tree in, wouldn't you?
It's true.
And then, in the middle of all that, there's another Fleetwood Mac.
That's right. I want to talk about that if we get to it. That's what I know. So you're going along like, wait a minute, where did you come from?
I mean, I just love the members that have come and gone. You know, it is like EastEnders. Instead of saying "get out of my pub," it's like "get out of my band," isn't it? Oh well. Anyway, listen. There's no time to waste. Should we get him on?
Get him on. Welcome to Rockonteurs.
Okay, guys, I'm ready.
This was great, guys. It's so great to talk to two guys that have done this.
Well, it's a big tune for sure. I actually wrote that originally for Tina Turner.
Of course, I had gone and found Joni Mitchell down in Florida and brought her back.
You know, what people forget about Bowie is that he was such a kind man.
Remember me? I'm in a band now. It's called Roxy Music.
You know this thing about the 10,000 hours of experience?
Oh, yeah.
Get good at something. When we recorded Arnold Lane, we'd done about 50 hours.
The Rockonteurs podcast with Gary Kemp and Guy Pratt.
Hey!
At last.
How are you?
We're good. I'm needing my glasses so I can see all your beautiful, handsome faces.
You're looking beautiful there, man.
Yeah, you look amazing, Mick. You look fantastic.
Well, it comes under the heading, I'm not dead yet.
But thank you for doing this.
Oh, brilliant.
John has got one island in Hawaii.
No, he used to live, McVie, you mean, right?
Yes.
He lived here on Maui for years and then went to Honolulu and lived there. And about, probably longer than I realized, probably about nearly 5 years ago, he moved back to LA. So I'm the only islander. Stevie has a home here on Maui, but she's not often here.
But you grew up in a sort of peripatetic way, didn't you? You were traveling around a lot.
Yeah, Dad in the Air Force. So I found that the correct vocation, traveling around in a rock and roll band instead of the army.
Talking of which, Mick, I did, because you know I know Amelia, I did actually once have the most delightful lunch and afternoon with your mum, Biddy, at her house in Salisbury.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Mum has been very present at the moment. And she had a favorite phrase which ties in with your traveling comment about me young when we just traveled and followed Dad around all over the world, really. And she has this phrase, Biddy Fleetwood, pack and follow. She was packing and following. And any complaint from, not really us bunch, because we were so used to pack and following, but anyone who would be like semi-disturbed of, there's traveling and this, and Mum would go, oh, nonsense, pick yourself up, stop complaining, pack and follow.
Right. Well, I do remember at the house, in Pride of Place, for some reason, this always stayed with us, a long time ago now, is that she had this framed photo of you and John, and you look like you're both wearing sort of dirty old raincoats, and you're carrying all of your platinum records, and you're very furtively going into a pawnbroker's on Hollywood Boulevard.
Well, that's how we all end up,
Yeah, exactly.
Spent all of my money about 20,000 times, but we formed, me and John, I managed, well, John sort of didn't, but I did, for better or for worse, which turned out pretty well. I managed Fleetwood Mac for about 14 years during the heyday, until I got too crazy and sort of retired myself out of that line of business. And one of the things we formed, because artists are always used to getting rooked and crooked and ripped off and never getting paid, especially back in the day, and I think probably still happens to some extent. But you hear those awful stories, the Tamla Motown and people that they never got paid. They were like slave trade. It was awful. So we formed, the company was called CD Management.
CD.
Yeah, very seedy. That was we're selling off all their goods down the pawn shop downtown. I remember posing for a picture, the whole band. We superimposed me and John with the band on a photograph just of me and John being the management company, having them all sign their lives away to seedy management, smart management.
While we're on your family and family connections with us, I worked with your sister Susan in the Craze movie.
Wow.
I played Ronnie and she played my Aunt Rose in that. I mean, she was amazing. I mean, I thought her performance in that was extraordinary. And sadly as well, she has a deathbed scene in that, which she played out in the most extraordinary fashion. And she was wonderful because I was a new boy to the profession, really. And, these were great old theatre actors that I was surrounded by, and Susan was so supportive.
No, it's so pregnant the way our conversation's already started, because Susan, along with Biddy, my nephew Kels is visiting me, and Mum and Dad he was very, very close to, and he's like still the guy who says, you need to phone up, a cousin, you need to, come on, Mick, do it. And he's here with me, and I love him very, very much. And of course, Susan was a huge part just recently of our conversations. And he sent me, I was with him yesterday and he's spending a couple of weeks with me. And he sent me an incredible, I suppose, written dialogue by Sir Anthony Hopkins. And just this morning, I was reading it to my girlfriend, and I read her the whole thing, because it's just very revealing from his history. And of course, then I segued, he went to RADA with Susan, and I was just talking about it not even an hour ago.
Wow.
And also the other night, she'd never seen The Sexy Beast. The film is beyond fantastic. I hadn't seen it in a while. And of course, that led to a conversation, no kidding, of the characters and where they came from. And of course, all about the Cray twins. Yeah. And then she did that film, which I think was the last, I'm not good with names, but the very famous Russian director called The Sacrifice, which was a film she made.
Right.
Of course, the Craze I knew all about. But all of this has just been literally freshly spoken about. I totally get your...
And she died so young.
Yeah.
That was what I was surprised when I saw today, how young she was. I mean, it's sort of the same age as Helen McCrory, who's just left us as well.
Yeah. No, I know. Just so before, not a timely going away for sure. But it also reminded me, talking about this morning when you said, a type of reverence for Susan, was a very, very fine actress, as you know, and an agent. She went, of course, spent many years with the Royal Shakespeare Company, and she was up at Stratford. And again, I'm not remembering his name, but there was a young chap that used to hang around the green door after performances, pretending to be an agent.
That was Gary.
Yeah, right.
Pretending to be an agent, and said, "Would you let me? Would you let me? Would you let me?" Really, I think for a couple of years, fairly long period. And she obviously knew that he adored her work and so forth. And one time, literally coming out of the theatre at Stratford, she said, "You're on. You're going to be my agent. Relax." And he's one of the biggest agents in the world. He's handled Sir Anthony Hopkins and amongst many, many others. And I saw and went to see him after we lost Susan, and that Sir Anthony, about a week before, was talking about his work with Susan and how he literally listed her as pretty much the real deal, one that he would always remember as being such a fine actor. It was just lovely to hear that.
Mick, there's so much to talk about with your band. I mean, we were just saying, Guy and I, how extraordinary this history is.
Well, the interesting thing, Mick, is that there tend to be two types of musicians, right? There are people who kind of get in a band, align themselves with the band, and that's what they want to do. They want to be in a band forever. And then there's people who just want to go and work with lots of different people and be journeyman musicians. You've managed to do both. You've played with hundreds and hundreds of different musicians while staying in the same band the whole time.
I mean, this is the truth, Guy. If you just had Fleetwood Mac records in your album collection, if that's all you were allowed, you would have quite a lot of genres.
I don't know how much maybe I've done more than I realized in terms of playing with other people.
I mean, just within the band, you know.
Oh, well, yeah, that's true. I mean, there's little sub bands and going to Africa. And I said, yeah, you've reminded me of bits and pieces. Well, part of that, I think, is really part of an answer where people go, like, me and John have been in Fleetwood Mac since the beginning. And in a slightly quippy, humorous way, you go, well, why is that? How is that? And I think it's really one of the benefits of being in quote, not in the front line, being in a rhythm section and yet being, you know, hopefully pretty useful intrinsically in terms of keeping everything together. And I don't mind saying that because I've learned to say it's okay. What did you really do in Fleetwood Mac? Well, I didn't write all the songs, but the band became my song, you know.
Yeah. Oh, that's a nice way of putting it.
And I think that's it. And it also allows you to do things more readily, probably, and be more open, just because, you know, a drummer, a rhythm section needs people to play with, you know, so that becomes an easier thing to do, I would think, proportionately. Never any master plan to it. I just sort of wandered into it and like to keep playing. When we're down, our downtime for me would be probably, you know, who knows? I don't really know. I'm making it up off the top of my head, but
Please do.
I never had the faculty for whatever reason, although I'm starting to now, which is great and fun, even if it's terrible. I enjoy writing little vignettes and things, and having fun learning ukulele and all one chord, but I think it really kept me busy, where when we were down from playing, everyone else maybe was just more sensible. John would go sailing and I was always looking like a mother hen as to what do I do? Mm-hmm. You know, I'm not sitting in the front living room playing guitar, playing piano, writing poetry like Stevie. I just wasn't that person. So when I think I just decided, well, then I just keep playing, you know,
right.
And wait for the call, or rather make the call and gather the troops around, and then off we go again. So that probably was part of it.
Oh, because you clearly have great organizational skills as well, if you're managing the band. And by the way, I must say, because the Peter Green Memorial, which I was at, was mind-blowing. And that's incredible feat, just getting all those people.
Yeah, I had brown underpants on that day. That was a dream come true. Sadly, we lost Peter before this was supposed to come out a year ago, and now it's out, and we're actually super gratified. Glyn Johns, who produced the whole thing with me and was a huge help, texted me and said, "How about that? My son." Nathan, I think his name is. My son has a #1 album in England, and I have a #3 album, which is the album you're talking about, which is super gratifying.
Wow!
But the album is, you know, I don't think it's going to hang in there for that long. But knowing you have in England, especially because that's what the whole pathos of the whole thing was about. We're sitting there with a hit album as of the moment, with a very how would that be? You know, it's sort of like off the wall that it would even really get listened to, but it has been, and it turned out to be a hugely gratifying. I don't know if you saw the show,
yeah.
But there's a documentary still to come out, the making of, and because we rehearsed here in Hawaii, and then
Dave Bronze was very happy about that. I remember him telling me.
Yeah,
I was very jealous.
Yeah, well, I was very happy to have him and Andy Fairweather-Low, who came. I didn't know them terribly well, but Glyn Johns, and I was hugely grateful for that as a choice for the core band. Mm-hmm. They were incredible, are incredible, and we had the greatest time. Then we all went off to London and did that one night, and then the world closed down.
That's right. Literally. Yeah, it's the last thing I went to. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of a longer rehearsal, And we just thankfully we didn't do it, because had this sort of crept into another week of rehearsal, and then the show would have been allocated to be a little later, it simply wouldn't have happened.
And was the plan to take it to America or?
Well, there are always funny plans. I mean, I once having done it, and this was going to come out, and now it is out, and we're doing our best to find ways to promote it. But I most certainly would have taken that core band with Johnny Lang and the guys and the band you saw, and then with the hope in England to go and play some blues festivals and stuff, maybe with a couple of the heavy hitters coming in to do it. And or the idea for me was to take that core band and actually replicate, there's some great players all over the world. If you go to Australia, New Zealand, that are in the genre of being able to deliver some really cool renditions of those songs. And that was a loose idea. But in England, I was really hoping to get, a couple and go to Glastonbury or something and have the likes of the one or two special lads turn up.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was the cast list was absurd. But can I just say the what knocked me out on the night, totally blew my mind, which that's something I wasn't expecting to see, and I never thought I would see, was Jeremy Spencer, who played unbelievably as well.
He did. He was the secret.
David Gilmour said to me, he said, "Mate, that was nothing. You should have seen the sound check."
Because didn't Jeremy? Jeremy left the band and became a child of God at one point, didn't?
Correct. Yeah.
Liz, I think.
He literally just went out for a magazine.
Not with the Children of God,
right,
but yes.
But because this is a thing, Mick, sorry, I'm terribly sorry to screw it up, but it's because this story is so well told that he went out for a magazine and never came out. Where were you when he went out for a magazine? Were you on tour? Were you at home?
Yeah, I always used to, me and Jeremy were the deadly twins, where, one, big tall creature and he's about 5 foot nothing. So we were the eternal annoying comedy team. So we roomed together because no one could put up with us. We were always total endless pranks, and I was the stooge because Jeremy's incredibly funny. And if you remember some of the old performances, were pretty radical. I'll leave it at that. The Sex Pistols had nothing on us. And yeah, he did. He went out. We've been in San Francisco. And we had been San Franciscaned with some hallucinogenics and stuff. And he was always very quietly, very focused on his belief system. And he was very affected and oversensitive, I'm sure, but that was all naturally a part of his psyche anyhow. And when we land, I remember sitting next to him on the plane coming in on 727, and Jeremy looked out. It was just after the earthquakes had happened in LA, which for him was a sign that it's the beginning of the end. Yeah. And he turned around and said, "I don't want to be here." And we were landing. They're going to go and play at the Whiskey A Go-Go on Sunset Boulevard. We checked into a little smutty hotel off Hollywood Boulevard, and he went down to one of those sort of heady bookshops. He always liked to go out and find the prints and books, like funny books. And he never came back. They took him off the street and he disappeared, and we were all very alarmed. We eventually found him, and he at that point had decided to give it all up without any conversation, which was very confusing for us. And that was his exit. Yeah, I stayed in touch with him through the years. In fact, very much on and off. We were touring in Japan, and they traveled all over the world, with his team.
Wow.
Yeah, and he would turn up in funny places. And, for a while it was really, I just chose to take it as Jeremy, and I let it be known. And he was always cool, didn't try to sort of pull me into his belief system at the point. And he's very happy, very focused, and lives a very quiet life. So that performance was something that I had to really persuade him to do. I really wanted him to be there.
I mean, did you know he still played even, you know, did you?
Well, exactly. And he said, I don't know whether I can, you know, 'cause to him it was a big deal. He still plays and makes great, funny little records and stuff. But he's Jeremy.
It's funny how Mick, you've been drawn a few times to characters that wear their art on their sleeve but live on that fine line of tipping into the abyss. You know, with obviously with Peter, you know, with Peter Green and Jeremy and also Danny Cohen.
Yeah, so to have one in a band is kind of understandable and sort of standard back then, but three.
But there's something to be said about those characters. They're deeply into their performance.
Well, they are. I mean, I specifically with Peter, and indeed other elements that you're talking about. But these really, because they were all incredible. I consider myself highly tuned and sensitive, overly so, and a sort of sloppy date. But maybe I got lucky. They were in a world that became uncomfortable for them. And then the advent, especially with Peter, and he's openly has spoken about it, of course, he's the last person on earth that needed to be experimenting with psychedelics or being stoned in any way. And you go, well, why is that? Because he's already there. He was already that sensitive. Yeah. He was already beautiful and connected. And therefore, his story, which is really why, well, I would say everybody on that stage was there for their own reasons and about the music, but it was also about the magic of who this person was, you know, and what he left behind outside of his playing, because he was that powerful, and yet it freaked him out. You know, when you have that type of presence, and everything you can tell about what he's done, what he did, was to belay that, was to play. Let's face it, he called the band Fleetwood Mac. He could have been the gunslinger that came in, and we would have willingly been there. He was one of the gunslingers.
But wasn't that, because I heard this, there was one of many stories of the name, was that he'd said to Jeremy or someone that obviously he said, well, obviously I'm going to go off and have a solo career. You can go off and have a solo career. You know, John and Mick, what have they got? Give them the name of the band so they can at least carry on.
Well, it wasn't until
I don't know if it's quite like that, but
almost. And when we put the band together, which was ostensibly for sure, Peter said, well, I'm going to. So they're basically forcing me to form a band. I don't really want to do it. I want to go off to Africa like Brian Jones and hang out in the mountains.
Right.
Which is what Eric did. And then all that stuff, you know, another story.
Yeah.
He just wanted the name of the band to be Fleetwood Mac. And he said, well, it was an instrumental we did that John Mayall gave him a birthday present of some studio time with Gus Dudgeon when he worked at Decca Records before the whole Elton John thing.
Right.
Coincidentally. And I remember the session. It was just me, John, and Peter. And we played on three tracks. One of them was an instrumental called Fleetwood Mac. But right then, they said, well, what are you going to call it? And he said, well, call it Fleetwood Mac because John and Mick are in here. And it was just a rough thing to put on the tape box. And that's how the name came about. Years later, he was furious. And I don't blame him. Mike Vernon had the first album said Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac. And he had said, no, that's never going to happen. And I don't blame them because Peter Green was the only thing that we had, you know, coming out of John Mayall and Peter Green is God and Eric Clapton's crap and all the stuff that
was still.
all this stuff you know, spray painted over the underground.
Yeah.
And then, you know, before that, of course, it was Eric and all this stuff was going on. So when we formed and put the album out, Mike Vernon, against seemingly his better judgment, but I don't blame him, called it Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, and Peter was furious. It was too late. They were all printed up. And ever since then it became, and then years later, the story along Shaggy Dog, I know I go around in circles, but years later, he had done an article, and I maybe it was with Jeremy, I don't know, a long time after the fact. And they were saying, well, how come the band's called Fleetwood Mac? And that's when he said, which when I heard it, I was not only incredibly moved, but it's a good story as to say how unselfish Peter was.
Yeah.
And not only with his playing, when he welcomed Danny Cohen in, he welcomed Jeremy in right at the beginning. He could have been, like you said, a creature that was in control of the whole thing very easily. And he said, well, one thing I just knew, and that I thought, I didn't know it at the time at all. He said, I just always thought that maybe I'd be moving on and I wanted Mick and John to have a band.
And boy, did you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, your vision all along is what's. I don't want to skip completely over what got you to become a drummer in the first place. I mean, you know, because there aren't many leaders of the band out there. It's kind of an old-fashioned thing where the jazz drummer is the leader of the band, isn't it? But not in rock music.
The big logo on the front of the kit.
Yeah. But who are your heroes? Who did you want to be?
My early heroes would be like Sandy Nelson, who did like Let There Be Drums. And then I followed like a hawk at the Shadows, and that was Tony Meehan. Much later on, when I went to London, I started listening to B.B. King, and that's the king of the shuffle. I'm forgetting his name now. Sonny Freeman, who played on that fantastic Live at the Regal, which is just a stellar album with B.B. Mm-hmm. And that was really about it. I started banging furniture when I was about, I don't know, 6. Mum used to listen to the BBC, and we had these things, leather ottomans really stuffed with newspaper for years, that when we lived in Egypt, Mum and Dad must have bought some. They was lying around, and they sounded great. So she would listen to the radio and smoke her one cigarette of the day and have a Dubonnet. And I would often, I don't know, I just started hitting furniture.
Was there any Egyptian music? Was there any of that sort of percussion vibe coming in, or no?
No, I don't think so. Probably awful English pop music or something.
But it's funny you're into the Shadows, because even with Albatross and with the stuff you did with Danny on Bare Trees, you know, there's melodic instrumentals were also part of your thing for a long time.
Correct, and I always later on, and I still haven't been successful, but happily I'm sort of back in contact with Lindsey Buckingham. But while he was in the band,
the world rejoices.
Yeah, you know, while he was in the band, I said and it wasn't like resistant. We just sadly never did it, because he's a great instrumentalist. It's sort of part of Fleetwood Mac's history, these funny instrumentals of an umbilical that's gone through a lot of our history, in actual fact. So I'm still hopeful that part of it, but that the Shadows and of course Hank Marvin specifically,
who we've had on the show.
You did?
Yeah, he was fantastic.
He lives in Perth. In Perth.
Yeah.
And he came to a show, and he's just sweet. I went to see the Shadows, their last tour in Australia. We happened to be there. I took the lads, Vito, who's a huge Hank fan, and they were note perfect. They were spectacular. Because Brian Bennett is playing drums with them now, and Cliff was great, and the whole thing was fantastic. Had like 20,000 people. You go like, they're still happening. Unbelievable. Yeah. But the sweetest guy. But think about the influence that he had. And now people look to heroes like Eric and Peter and Jeff Beck, who's a stellar individual, totally so unique. The more I listen to Jeff Beck, I go like, wow, I never really understood how unique he is.
He should have been in your band.
Yeah, you know, it's just unbelievably outrageous.
Well, he's kind of like the guitar version of hip hop, in that, like, there's nothing he can't take. Danny Boy, Nessun Dorma, you know, anything.
Like a savant, or just whatever. But a lot of that, and all those players had real reverence for Hank Marvin.
Oh, they all do. Yeah, no, that's the one. That's such a constant we found through, is that, you know, Hank is absolute way more than sort of Scotty Moore or any of, you know.
And that's the influence on less is more melody, and of course Peter hung on to that in no uncertain terms. One naturally, but it happens to reflect on his regard for Hank, and just the way he played was so.
You're right. I mean, to me, I think this is why Peter is, I don't want to get into who's better than whom here, but, you know, what Peter does is much more melodic than what Eric did. Eric was a different kind of player, you know, he didn't have the strength of melody. He doesn't have that strength of melody and instrumentation that Peter had.
Well, I get what you're saying, and it's like much of a muchness when you're talking about incredible guitar players, and I understand that. And I have a loyalty and a taste reference that I was born into it through the less is more phrase, you know, and Peter was an advocate of that. And he would insist in the nicest possible way. And I think that's why he thought I'd be a good candidate to play with, because I'm really not that clever. So he was never going to be confronted with sort of a repeat of Ainsley Dunbar, who's an incredible drummer, but too clever for what Peter wanted.
But one other thing about Peter, which I don't think you hear enough about, is because he's so revered for the guitar, is his voice, the incredible authority and maturity and the wisdom in that voice. Unreal.
And then you look back, certainly on this whole thing of what we did in London was a reminder. You go, you know, you make jokes, well, what was that? Or what was in the water? And everyone has their own version of it, you know, from all the bands in Liverpool and you know, it's nothing exclusive, but something was really, it was amazing that these very young, funny little white guys led by a little Jewish downtrodden kid from the East End of London ended up doing a really fucking good job at emulating, first of all, and then reinterpreting, and then channeling something that I don't know where it came from, but it was real, and it has left its mark, which is really the mark that everyone did walk on that stage had been touched by it.
I think in British music, there's a line that goes as well from sort of the trad jazz and the George Melly and that sort of scene somehow kind of coming together with rock American blues, but that discipline was kind of helping to create the scene.
Yeah, I mean, you know, whatever happened to Peter, and it's not the same band. I mean, the Rolling Stones, I've had a few sort of musical wet dreams where I actually woke up and Charlie had the flu and I was asked to play with the Rolling Stones. Which...
Wouldn't he let you sit in?
I love the fact that in music, no matter who you are, you always wish you were the other guy. Like, so, you know, it's like, you know, that Mick wakes up now and again and thinks, shit, why wasn't I in the Beatles? You know?
Yeah. So, no complaints from whence I've come. But what I was just flashing on what happened, say, to them, very much a band, you know, thankfully, a real band, as we were. And I'm not saying, but you know, there are those bands that tend to be, they're all very much about one element that's in the band, you know. And even with Mick there, the fact is, it was the Rolling Stones, you know, and it resonated like that, like Fleetwood Mac. And what happened in the same way is they're a blues band. And then you look at their early writing, which I think has gone unnoticed to a large extent. You know, the Stones, I think, never, in my opinion, never got the real ultimate kudos for being incredible creative songwriters. But if you look at the beginning of it and their albums, it's basically Bo Diddley and Chuck Berry and, you know, thing. And then they made that transition, which is what Peter did. But they took all of their boot camp, their training never left them. It never left them. Like with me and John, although the music changed through Fleetwood Mac, if you quietly are aware, apart from a few things which were atmospherically not very character bound in terms of the rhythm section, but not much, through the history of Fleetwood Mac, that's been the connect. And having Peter make a quantum leap into starting to write, starting to think on his own. He never left his training ground. And that's like the Stones, you know, where they just like, happened to move on, but you could always find them. You could
remember your training.
Remember your training, like how painful it was. No.
Mick, you know, a lot of your success is down to your vision in making choices. There's a moment in your career which is akin to, in my mind, as a fan of it all, of Paul meeting John. And it's you being in that studio and Lindsey Buckingham singing through the speakers, and that is one of the great apexes of rock history that changed so many lives. You've got to talk to us about that moment and how it felt and what went on.
Well, yeah, I remember it well. Bob Welch was still with us, who is yet another person who was a massive part of our history.
Yeah,
sadly missed, and a dear friend, and he had left the band. But we ended a tour, and I'm surprised he didn't tell me, but I think he just couldn't tell me until the last gig. He said, "Well, I'm leaving the band," and he was very unhappy in his personal life. So I understood, but it was sort of not a complete shock, but it was a bit of a shock. And I was looking for prior to that, looking for a studio when Bob was in the band. And I went up to Laurel Canyon. There's a store which is still there with a great documentary about.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, it's still there with pictures of Joni Mitchell and Mama Cass on the wall. And I'm woo the day they ripped that place down. And I need to go and film this story there and tell the story, because I never did it and I meant to do it. Just so this is where it started. And I went in there, and Jenny and I were up in Laurel Canyon. I went just to get some groceries or something, an old beaten up Cadillac. I met this sort of crazy hustler type guy that I vaguely knew. And I said, well, he said, what are you up to? And I said, well, I'm actually looking for a studio. I've got a couple of weeks off before we end the tour for the next album. And he said, well, I'm repping an album, a studio called Sound City in the Valley. And so he knew a lot of rock and rollers, so he obviously got himself a job. And right there and then I said, well, I better just get my groceries out the back of this Cadillac because there's no air conditioner, and the hood never worked, you know, the top. So I shoved all my stuff in the back of his car, and I said, I'll come with you now and take a look at the studio. And that was it. Walked in the studio. Keith Olsen was there, happened to be there, who produced Buckingham Nicks. Stevie and Lindsey happened to be in the studio doing demos for the next album, which ended up being the Fleetwood Mac album, Fleetwood Mac. And I had no reason, apart from the music must have been so, in the 20 minutes, half an hour of me hanging out at the studio, vague recollect from Lindsey about sort of met me, and I saw Stevie through the window, and Keith said, oh yeah, this is the music. And he happened to put on Buckingham Nicks and said, this is the music that I made with this duo. They're in there doing demos or something. And he played a tape just for want of something to play, to hear the speakers. And that's what triggered it. I then went back on the road. Bob, after a couple of weeks, then the end of the tour, said he's leaving. And somehow in that time in the studio, it must have been so profound. And I went, that he was gone, and I knew it. I thought, well, what are we going to do? And I remembered the music. And I phoned Keith Olsen up, and I said, you know that music you played me? What's the story? Do you think they were, even with no rehearsal, they joined Fleetwood Mac with not one note played. I just fucking knew it. And I played it to John and Chris, and John said, we're crazy, we've got to like audition them or something. I said, no. And they ended up agreeing because they heard the album. And I said, I think this is the right thing to do.
But wasn't it you just wanted Lindsey, wasn't it? But the deal was Stevie had to come.
I was looking for it. Woo the day that Stevie will ever forgive me for the band. And I found out the nice part of the story is, even though I get beaten up about it, is that Lindsey made it very clear that no me if Stevie's not there. And, you know, we were looking for a guitar player. And then very quickly, but she tends to forget, it became very apparent that she'd written half the songs, which I was more than well aware of, plus the loyalty from Lindsey with what they were doing. So they transported transported themselves with what they were about to do into Fleetwood Mac without playing a note.
And how did Chrissy feel about it? Because I mean, did she feel a little bit put out having this? I mean, let's face it, it's a gorgeous, beautiful, talented person coming into the group.
Christine would tell the stories like this. She said, Mick, I think, all joking aside, there's nothing worse than two women that can't stand each other, like catcalling. So do me a favor, let me meet Stevie. And we all went out to a Mexican restaurant on 3rd Street, and they got on like a house on fire. And she wasn't really serious, but she was just saying, let me at least meet my fellow lady in the band. And I said, of course, and we went out, and it was all a go, and they became and remained great friends through a whole load of unbelievable stuff when you look at the history of what
unbelievable. Because you made that album, which was a real slow burn, wasn't it? It's kind of happened back. Everything sort of happened backwards. It's like, oh, there's Rumours, but then, oh no, here's all this other stuff. But that had sort of happened before. And
yeah, well,
it was a weird couple of years.
If ever there's a Broadway show, we should be able to put one on.
Oh my God!
And it still is. I've said a couple of things lately, and I don't mind. And going, that's likelihood of it happening. In terms of burying, but I would like certain hatchets to be buried, and they really exist between Stevie and Lindsay, so we'll see.
Because you're asking divorced people to be creative together, aren't you? And that's tough.
That's what the making of Rumours. All of us, including Amy's mother, Jenny, we'd broken up, and I was in pieces, and I'm sure she was too. It was a mess. So everyone in the band was completely disengaged from their partners while we made Rumours. And it's almost an impossible task. I had Warner Brothers phoning me up going like, just be truthful. Tell me when the band's breaking up. I said, no, we're going to make it. We're going to make it. And the music took care of that. But like Lindsay said years later, and I get it. He said, we were never able to heal.
But do you think that's part of the the success is because of the amount of pain and honesty that goes into the songs and the relationships between the people playing it is why that, there's something about that album. It's like Dark Side of the Moon. It's entered the popular subconscious in a way that other records just haven't.
Do you know what I think it is, Guy? I think because their experiences was going into so deeply into the music that what you hear on the album is utter truth.
And that somehow that resonates with the wider world. But no matter if you know what's making it happen or not, there's an honesty and a pain in it that makes it real and makes it makes it truth. That's what true art is, isn't it? Someone sharing their truth.
I have to agree, and it's part of the sort of the long story of Fleetwood Mac, and I do like to think that. Well, I not do like to think. I know that existed. In the beginning of the band with Peter, and the whole thing is no doubt a survival story, which is really beyond belief. We shouldn't have earned the right to survive, really, but we did, and we have, and it's all somehow connected to an honesty that was not planned, that ends up with being human and vulnerable, and outside of the music, sometimes foolishly so. We revealed way too much with what was really going on in the subtext of a lot of stuff, but we did, and sort of paid the price. It was very hard to do an interview without talking about who's creeping down the corridor and sleeping with each other, when really we wanted to say, well, would you like to ask something about the music? It was our fault. We were very overly open about that. However, the end result is it's actually been a plus, because people look to the experience of whatever it is under the heading of this funny band called Fleetwood Mac, is that it has, my dad would say, like, no matter what, it's been worth a damn. And with all of the pain and all of the things where you go, sometimes, especially me, but John would go like, should we have kept it going? It's like so much heartache sometimes, but I don't feel that in retrospect. I think it's all been worth a damn. And it's all, when we walk on a stage, God knows we hope it's about the music, and we believe it is. But there's also something else. And I think that became part of our story, which was a problem earlier on, but it is not now. And I think it becomes very meaningful for especially young people to grab onto a body of work that they can really see people as a major subtext to it. There are some bands that just, it's the band, but there's not a super emotional, especially what caused it was that the man and woman, the love and the no love, the dysfunctionality thing was unique.
I think it's akin. It reminds me in art. It reminds me of the pre-Raphaelites, when these guys having relationships with each other's muses who were also artists, and that all went into their work. Or even forgive me for being pretentious, but the Bloomsbury set, or Shelley and Byron, and that whole story that surrounds their passion spilling into their work.
Well, the Bloomsbury set, the great line about them, which is they lived in squares and loved in triangles.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
But there is something that you inadvertently left us within the history of rock and roll. You left us this incredible tale of human beings we're fascinated by now.
Well, I think all the players in the player are actually still fascinated. I'm certainly one of them. And sometimes, unless you start, talking about it as we are now, it triggers a whole load of things that, often you go like, how did that happen? And then there are explanations of, now I know how it happened. So you flip-flop around, especially when you do talk about it, because we've all kept going forward. But that, again, tying into, people ask what was the driving force about doing the show in London, for instance, for Peter and for the band and the history of the band, was before I used one of Peter's songs, Before the Beginning. I'm dyslexic, so I probably messed up the real meaning of what I was trying to say. But Before the Beginning, and a lot of people think the beginning of Fleetwood Mac is the Rumours incarnation, understandably, because the enormity of it eclipsed everything that, in many ways, that came before. Understandable. So, but what people feel as the beginning, there was something before the beginning, which is this whole thing we did in London and then the longer the journey and before it really ends, which, we know it's going to end, we're all getting on anyhow, but the band, I thought, before it really stops, how about reminding what happened at the beginning? Mm-hmm. Well, this will never happen. And that was really, apart from letting people know that a lot of people think that me and John, or maybe me, started the band and the name and all that stuff. And it's not. It's Peter started this band, and Peter started this story. That I wanted to be a line in the sand, just as a document that he could give a damn about it. He's moved on now anyhow. But I wanted someone to give a damn.
Mick, was there a part of you guys creatively after Rumours going forward where you felt we need to create personal chaos to make our best record?
No, it was a completely accidental mess.
But you did go on and make that, because I remember at the time the really big deal was that for being a nerdy young muso as I was that that Tusk was the first ever digitally recorded album.
I never knew that. Well, I don't think it was. I think
it was.
Let's not fall out.
Someone at your record company.
Don't fall out. Right? Make an album.
I think the first digital album in our world would the side player. What's his name? He made that lovely album in Cuba.
Oh no, Raikuda. No, his was the first CD. I think you did the first digital recording.
Okay.
I saw you guys with Neil Finn at Wembley year before last, I think it was. And he's great. He's a beautiful player. Absolutely love him. And, I think this is the other, you obviously know exactly who to choose, who works for you. But I think we all wanted Lindsay back. I mean, what's the future there?
Well, I don't think there's much of a future, but I do know in my world that I visualize, and we spoke very loosely about it. He said, I'd love to come out and have a play with you. And I think that I like to think would happen. And I think my whole thing would be that the band stays as it is. And I just think it's a pipe dream for sure. But the thought of walking on the stage and having Lindsay be part of that performance, I think would be very healing. It's not saying goodbye to Mike or to Neil, and we don't behave like that. But something connective. So the second, well, not second best, but another alternative. I believe that me and Lindsay will make some music together, as he did with Christine and so forth. I would love that, and no matter what, umbraged feelings that aren't healed for all their own personal reasons, I would like to be sort of the instigator of the hope that would happen before we all knock it on the head.
Well, I think the world would like that too. No,
I know they would, and it almost makes me cry.
Mick, thank you. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, and fantastic talking to you, and a lot of lovely connective stuff directly with my family, which was really wild, considering it's been so. Both your comments were just literally fresh off my conversation, so that was a really nice entree to this conversation.
Lots of love.
That was a spiritual experience, wasn't it?
It was really moving, actually, especially at the end. I think I forgot that we were doing the Rockonteurs. So at times when we've done this in the past, you're thinking all the time, I've got to ask this question, I've got to ask that. It became a very fluid chat with him, where there's so much you have to deal with in the history of Fleetwood Mac that really you've just got to find a couple of key moments and just see what is in there.
But it was beautiful. It just it was it just felt kind of sacred. I don't know. It was really, really special talking to him.
We're very honoured to be in this job, and I'm glad we're doing it. It's going to be a hard one to beat, though.
Yeah,
Mick
really
Fleetwood, he's going to be hard to beat. Anyway, listen, thank you very much for listening, and please keep sending us those messages. Everything you send us on social media is really appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. So keep up with the reviews. Thanks to Ben, our producer, and if you enjoyed that one 100th of as much as we did, then it's an hour well spent.
So it's good night from me.
And it's good night from them.